Okay, let's dive right into this explainer by looking at a man who died broke, bitter, and entirely convinced that the whole world had conspired against him. His greatest invention was never finished, his closest collaborator ended up estranged from him, his neighbors actively hated him, and his own government completely abandoned him. Yet, despite all of this tragedy, Charles Babbage is the absolute reason you are using a digital device right now. I mean, without him, there's no computer, there's no internet, there's really just silence and the scratch of a quill on paper. So today, we're going to explore the story of the most important man you probably know almost nothing about. It's just this wild, almost unbelievable contrast between Babbage's two realities. On one hand, his life ended in misery in 1871. He was a man who spent his final decades completely alienated from the society around him. But his legacy? It's literally monumental. He is the misunderstood genius who mapped out the exact architecture for modern technology. Think about it. Every single time you open your laptop or unlock your phone, you are, in a very real sense, operating the engine that Charles Babbage designed but never actually got to build. So how does someone become so fundamentally crucial to the modern world, yet so fiercely rejected by their own? To understand how a mind like that actually works, we kind of have to rewind to his childhood. Born the day after Christmas in 1791, Babbage was, well, he was the kind of kid who made adults deeply uncomfortable. Why? Because he asked questions nobody wanted to answer, and if they wouldn't tell him, he'd just find out himself. His exhausted mother would reportedly find him in the kitchen at odd hours, completely disassembling clocks, music boxes, and mechanical dolls. He wasn't just breaking his toys, though. For Babbage, understanding a thing meant taking it apart. This relentless, almost obsessive compulsion to look behind the curtain at the inner mechanisms of the world, that defined his entire life. So, fast forward to 1810, and this relentless curiosity leads him to Cambridge University. He's already taught himself advanced math, but instead of being challenged, he is totally disappointed. Cambridge is decades out of date compared to the rest of Europe. So at just 19, he co-founds the Analytical Society, basically to drag British math kicking and screaming into the modern age. Then, around 1821, he's reviewing mathematical tables with his friend, the astronomer John Herschel. Now, these tables were produced by human computers, literal people calculating figures by hand, and they were absolutely riddled with errors. We're talking about errors that, if you were navigating a ship in the dark, could literally kill you. Looking at those deadly errors, Babbage made this seemingly throwaway remark. He said, "I wish to God these calculations had been executed by steam." But he never threw an idea away. That thought just lodged itself right in his brain. What if he could build a machine that did math not roughly, but perfectly, every single time, by sheer mechanical necessity? A machine completely without a human element to make mistakes. And that right there sparked his obsessive quest to build the difference engine. This mechanical calculator of extraordinary ambition, designed to automatically print mathematical tables accurate to 20 decimal places. So, in 1823, the British government gives him £1,700 to get started. By the way, that's the first government grant for a computing project in human history. To build it, Babbage hires a brilliant master engineer named Joseph Clement. But here's the catch. The parts required tolerances that had never been achieved before in history. They weren't just building a calculator. They literally had to invent entirely new precision tools just to make the tools that would make the engine. Because of this monumental difficulty, that initial grant quickly became totally insufficient, spiraling into a staggering £17,000 financial black hole over the next decade. To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this scandal, consider this. For £17,000, the 19th century British government could have built 2 entire Royal Navy warships. 2 of them. Instead, they essentially bought 2 warships worth of machined parts, some drawings, and increasingly erratic progress reports from a genius who just kept changing his mind. So after years of immense frustration and absolutely nothing tangible to show for it, Prime Minister Robert Peel, who was completely out of patience, finally pulled the plug on the funding in 1842. Now, you're probably asking yourself, wait, why did the government get absolutely nothing after a decade of work? Well, the reason is that Babbage actually abandoned the difference engine himself. Why? Because he had a better idea. Around 1833, he conceived of something he called the Analytical Engine. He was leaping from a mere calculator that could only solve specific equations to a fully programmable, general-purpose mechanical computer. He designed a machine that would accept instructions on punched cards. This completely changed the trajectory of technology forever. And the visionary nature of his idea becomes crystal clear when we map his 1830s Victorian terminology directly to the architecture of the very device you are using to listen to this right now. He designed the store, which is exactly what we call computer memory today, used for holding data. He designed the mill, which we now call a processor, to execute the calculations. And he used punched cards for input and output to provide sequential instructions. It was, in every conceptual sense, a modern computer, completely designed in the 1830s. I mean, that is absolutely mind-blowing. It was during these doomed, wildly ambitious years that he met someone who understood what he was building. Actually, she possibly even understood it better than he did. Augusta Ada King, Countess of Lovelace, the daughter of the famous poet Lord Byron. She was introduced to Babbage at a dinner party in 1833 when she was just 17 years old. He was there showing off a small prototype of his difference engine. And while all the other guests were just admiring the machine as a neat mechanical curiosity, Ada saw something entirely different. She saw the massive, earth-shattering conceptual idea inside the machine. Now, in the spirit of impartial reporting, it's definitely worth noting that there is a persistent, scholarly debate over their legendary 1842 collaboration. When Ada translated an article about the Analytical Engine, Babbage encouraged her to add her own notes. Some historians argue that Babbage heavily guided the most technically sophisticated sections, while others fiercely defend Ada's independent genius. But honestly, regardless of where you land on that debate, the reality is astounding. Her notes, which were 3 times longer than the original article, contained the very first algorithm ever designed to be carried out by a machine, specifically for computing Bernoulli numbers. This rightfully earned her the title of the world's first computer programmer, and Babbage affectionately called her the Enchantress of Numbers. Aside from all this heavy tech stuff and the tragedy of the unbuilt engine, Babbage was, well, frankly, he was a notoriously cranky polymath. He was constitutionally incapable of ignoring foolishness, and his feuds were legendary. He famously waged a vicious, years-long war on organ grinders and street musicians playing outside his window. He even tracked statistics to prove they were destroying exactly a quarter of his working capacity. Naturally, the musicians just gathered outside his house specifically to annoy him. He also published a fiery pamphlet in 1830 naming and shaming the Royal Academy of Sciences, fought the railway system over track gauges, and ran for Parliament twice. He lost both times, which surprised absolutely no one who had ever spent an afternoon with him. He fought about everything, sure, but the incredible thing is, he was also right about most of it. While his computer lay unbuilt, he designed an absurdly varied list of other inventions. He proposed a black box to record speed and data for railway carriages, more than a century before flight recorders were standard in aviation. He created a standardized system for clearing bank checks, designed the cow catcher for the front of locomotives, mapped tidal data, and even invented the ophthalmoscope to look into the human eye. Sadly, he failed to develop that last one and lost the credit to someone else. He really just had to sit there and watch the industrial world roar forward without him. So Babbage grew old in a house full of drawings, components, and bitterness. He died in 1871 with a pretty unenthusiastic obituary, his machine never built in his lifetime. But in 1991, the London Science Museum decided to finally settle the score. They built difference engine number 2, based on his exact designs. And, crucially, they only used tools and materials that would have been available in the 19th century. And here is what really, really matters. It worked. Perfectly. Every single calculation it performed was absolutely correct. The only things that stopped Charles Babbage were money, politics, and the human tendency to distrust people who are simply way too far ahead of their time. Which really brings us to our final thought for this explainer. Babbage wasn't unhinged. He was just perfectly right in 1833 for a world that simply wouldn't be ready until the first electronic computers were built in 1943. And it leaves us to wonder, what is the true, painful human cost of true visionary genius? When you see the future so clearly, but you can't bring anyone else along with you, does it destroy you? Think about that the next time you casually swipe on your smartphone. The ghost of Charles Babbage's brilliant, bitter mind is running right beneath your fingertips.